Good morning, Creator, and thank you for this day you've given us. I ask you, Creator, today for prayers for families, for our elder, Mr. Mike Maurice and his family. I ask for prayers for their families, for so many of them, of our elders that have passed. Creator, guide us today and every day, and our families, and keep us safe. I ask you, Creator, to continue to watch over us. And I ask that you guide us and our young children, our schools, the teachers, the frontliners, our doctors. We all need those prayers for them, but we also need to protect our people and have our people think about how it's affecting our children, our families. Keep us safe, Lord. Amen. First off, I want to congratulate Cort for doing this book. It's so important. I have the opportunity of working with him on the educational level, and it's so rewarding to see this young man giving his life to our people and our young people in the educational system, and not only to our young people, but to teaching all levels of people within the education level, that the Métis people are very educated, and this was something that was always been with us dear and close to our heart. As a descendant of the Round Prairie, which is close to Cort's heart, is of June in 1906, our people sat on the school board and were interested in education for our people. So it isn't just something that is new to us, it's something that's been with us from day one, when our older people were thought the education was very important. And for most of them, were not educated, but they found out that that's important. For some of our people that probably went their got an education in the residential schools, they felt the importance that it should continue on. And now I see young people like Cort, who was a very young teacher at a very young age. I remember when going to his school when he was so young, and then he's asked me to go in and talk, and I watched him grow over the years. And for me, it's not only the Corts. There's very many other of our young people that are in that education level, and our people that are going to university, and our people that are professors, and it's for me as an old person, it's rewarding to me because I didn't have that education. I wasn't fortunate to have that kind of an education. I went to day school. I lucky if I had a grade 5, but today I'm able to go and talk with these people, and they're my mentors, and I'm just so honored, people that will do this and do the work for our younger generation. So I want to say to you, Cort, from the bottom of my heart, it's an honor for me to come here and say a few words for you, and continue your work. Continue on with the work that will educate not only our young students, but our teachers and people within in our cities, and people to know that our people are educated, and we're going to continue to do this. I want to say to him, I knew your mother and I were great friends, my boy. And I know she's looking down, and your grandma, and they're honored. And I know that your aunt, Audrey, is so honored to and so proud of you. Your cousins in Edmonton, they had called me, and they're so honored to see and excited for you. So you have your family who is not just ordinary people, but your family are so honored to see the work that you have done and are doing. So I pray that I support you, that you continue this work, not only for our families, but for other um, generations to come. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
The importance of Métis-specific children's literature cannot be overstated. The stories of our history, cultural traditions, and contributions to this province and country are an essential part of Métis students seeing themselves reflected in their education experiences. The work of Métis authors is critical to the development of resources that accurately reflect the culture, languages, and history of our people. Métis children and youth need to see Métis people as heroines and heroes in stories that take place in settings of cultural and historical significance to our people.
Bon matin, de Shinnikashin Cort Dogniez. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cort Dogniez. I am a Métis man who was born and raised here in Saskatoon. I was really fortunate that as a boy and as a young man, I got to spend a lot of time with my kokum. And my kokum was a Cree-speaking woman. She grew up in Onion Lake and came to Saskatoon. And I was fortunate that I got to spend a lot of time with her, and so I got a lot of her stories, her history, her different perspectives. And I grew up, and that's sort of what gives me my foundation as a Métis man, to know who I am and what I am, and to have that pride as a Métis person. Being with my kokum, she told me so many different stories that after she passed, I wanted to honor her. And so when I retired from being a teacher after 41 years, I decided that I wanted to tell her story. And so that's what I did. So this book is called Road to Prairie Ronde. And it's the story actually of my grandma's father. The story happens right before the Northwest Resistance. So the Northwest Resistance happened in 1885. And so this story happens in 1883. And there's a lot of tension that's building because the Métis people have established themselves in and around the area of Batoche. But settlers are coming, and they're being granted land, and it's encroaching on the Métis people's land. And so they are feeling very stressed and are asking the government to recognize their land rights, but that's not happening. And so you may have heard of Gabriel Dumont. Well, that was my great uncle. So my grandma, Clara Dumont, her father was Frederick Dumont, and his father was Isidore Dumont, whose father was Isidore Dumont Jr., whose father was Isidore Dumont. Quite the use of the name. Anyway, Frederick's great-grandfather was one of the founders of a Métis community called Prairie Ronde, or Round Prairie as we call it today. And so in this story, what I wanted to do was tell how Frederick winds up back at Round Prairie. And so that's what this story is about. It's about Gabriel Dumont and his wife, Madeleine, and my great-grandfather, Isidore Dumont, and his wife, Judith, taking Frederick on a trip to Round Prairie. And so in order to do that, they have to travel in a Red River cart. And it takes a few days to travel from Batoche all the way back to Round Prairie. And so this is an opportunity for Frederick to have an adventure, for him to leave Batoche and actually experience the bigger world. And so that's what this story is about. So when I was writing this story, I thought it would be interesting to have a couple of adventures that happened. And so I'm really proud of this book. And I just want to put out a shout out to Jade McDougall, who did the illustration. So you can see the cover, and there's some beautiful illustrations in the book that just tell about the different events. But if I show you this picture, you might see that the women have fallen into the mud. And I just want to read you that part of the story because I thought it was quite funny. So this is how the story goes. So on the evening of the first day of their journey, it wasn't settlers or anyone from these three nations that the Dumonts encountered on the road to Prairie Ronde. Instead, it was two Dakota men traveling on horseback who met them on the trail. It was a lucky thing too. Isidore had been driving the cart when they needed to cross a boggy area in the road. Somehow, a cartwheel became trapped between two rocks hidden in the mud. They had tried to use the extra horses to pull the cart free, but the rope broke, and now the women and men had to work together to free the cart. Frederick was the first to notice the Dakota men and was sent to ask them for assistance. The two strangers quickly recognized the trouble and joined in to help rescue the cart. While the men rocked the cart back and forth, the women and Frederick were pulling hard on the cart horse's reins, hoping to free the wheel. A strong push from the four men freed the stubborn wheel, lurching the cart suddenly forward. Frederick let out a loud cheer, which immediately turned to laughter when he saw what had happened. To Cocum and to Tante Madeleine. The two women had been pulling with all their might and were suddenly thrown backwards into the mud and mire. They were now sitting in the middle of the road, covered in muck. The women shot a disapproving look at Frederick, who was immediately silenced, while the other men looked away, knowing better than to laugh. So I like that part because they were working so hard to get that wheel free that they weren't really thinking about what would happen if it did come free. And of course, when it did come free, because they were pulling so hard, they wound up falling back in the mud. And I know that Frederick would have laughed, as I would have laughed. But I also know that if that had been my Cocum, she would have shot me that look that would say, "Be quiet." And I would know better than to laugh. And of course, the men would have known better than to laugh as well. So that's just one of the things that happens on the adventure on the road to La Prairie Ronde. The other thing that I wanted to do when I was writing this story was make a connection to Saskatchewan's history. It's important that people know that the Métis have been here for such a long time, and that the territory that they occupied extended right from La Prairie Ronde, which is just south of Whitecap, Dakota First Nation, and extended right across through to Batoche, following that river that was so important to our livelihood. And the big thing that the Dumont family were famous for was that they were buffalo hunters. They weren't so big on being farmers, but they were big on hunting. And Frederick grew up hearing those stories. And of course, by 1883, buffalo were pretty scarce and hard to come by. But he was hoping that on this particular journey, he would see buffalo. So he's going to sit up and he's going to pay attention and he's going to watch the horizon. And he's hoping that even if he doesn't see a buffalo, maybe he'll see something else like a moose or an elk or a deer that will contribute to their food. And that he could at least be a part of it that way as a hunter. But there's a very famous story that is told about Gabriel Dumont in the Saskatoon region. So nowadays, Ralco Radio is on the east side of Saskatoon by the freeway. But in the old days, that was just the riverbank. And buffalo liked to be down in the ravine. And so there's a story of how Gabriel Dumont was hunting one day, and he shot a buffalo there, and he thought the buffalo was dead. And so for some reason, he climbed on that buffalo, and the buffalo wasn't dead, and it got up and it took off with him riding on the back. And so just like a bucking horse, Gabriel Dumont had to hang on for dear life until the buffalo finally succumbed to its wounds and died. And I thought I would include that in my story and just take some creative license with that story. And so if I can tell that one here, I'll do that as well. So just to give you some background, the story is that they were going through the river valley, and then Gabriel signals, and everybody stops and they know that something's up. And so they park the cart and they look and they see two buffalo down in the river valley. And so they talk about the rules of the hunt, that nobody takes off first until everybody is ready, that there's a signal, and that when whatever happens, they're going to share the food. And so Gabriel thinks about it in terms of a strategic plan, in terms of how things should go. And so when the shots are fired, the buffalo go one way, and the Dakota men get that first buffalo, but the other one, the large bull, turns and comes towards Gabriel Dumont, who shoots it. And so the buffalo falls at his feet. And so I just want to continue that story now. As Frederick raised his gun in a victory sign, he thought his chest would burst with pride and excitement. Gabriel returned the victory sign and then surprisingly climbed onto the back of the enormous bull, as if to pose for a celebration photograph. Suddenly, the buffalo rose to its feet with Gabriel desperately clutching at the long hair around its neck. Like a bucking bronco, the bull charged away with Gabriel hanging on for dear life. Frederick and the rest of the travelers watched in awe as the Métis cowboy bounced and swayed on the buffalo's back until the bull collapsed one final time. Gabriel gingerly dismounted and took a few deep breaths. He checked to make sure the animal was dead, then raised his fist and let out an enthusiastic whoop. Frederick and the men ran to congratulate him, while Madeline hugged him and then shook her finger at him and said, "You are always doing something to scare me." So that's just the story of Gabriel Dumont riding a buffalo here in Saskatoon. In this area, the Métis called this Bois de Flèche, Arrow Woods. And so that's what it was known before even white settlers came here, and even before Whitecap Dakota First Nations people had moved on to their reserve. So just a little bit of our Saskatchewan history. When I was writing this story and compiling the different parts, I was certainly feeling a sense of pride and a sense of awe in terms of how the Métis people struggled to survive on this land. It was such a hard life. So there was a lot of awe, a lot of amazement, but definitely a lot of pride as I thought about the accomplishments of the Métis people as they made their living hunting, farming, exporting goods. You know, they were so creative. And one of the things that comes back time and time again is that Métis people are resilient people. You know, we just are able to adjust to the times and make best with what they have. And I think that's what this story is about that resiliency of Métis people and that sense of pride that we have in terms of our history. When I first saw the cover of this book, I thought how beautiful, how amazing that Jade McDougall had captured sort of the spirit of my story. I was really impressed. And one of the things that I had asked Jade to do was to make sure that Frederick always wore a flat hat like this one. Family photos that I have of Frederick have him wearing that kind of hat, and I wanted to make sure that that was a part of the illustrations. And so when I first received the cover, I saw Frederick sitting on his horse with that hat on, and I was just like so proud and so happy. And it's so colorful, it's just so beautiful. And then when I got the book and I saw the quality and the detail of the illustrations, she just really captured the spirit of Frederick and everybody else. Obviously, she knew her Métis history because she knew what to put in the Métis cart in terms of like a Hudson Bay blanket and a buffalo robe and those sorts of things. She had really done it well. Even how she positioned the women, because the idea is that the women had to ride on the cart, and so even how she positioned the women I thought was so cool. Just so well done. The detail. This one, this picture of Frederick's Chapin, his great-grandfather, wearing his beaded vest, which is like my beaded vest. And I thought, oh wow, she must have looked at pictures and knew that we're flower beaded people. I know she's a Métis woman and would know that, but to add it and make it a part of the story was really incredible. I love that. And the fact that Chapin is also wearing a flat hat was pretty cool. So one of the things I was thinking about when I wrote this story was I was hoping that children in schools across this province would get an opportunity to read this story and experience that sense of pride that I have about being Métis. Lots of times we're considered the forgotten people because our story isn't told. And oftentimes people think, you know, that after the Northwest Resistance we kind of just disappeared, which is not the case. I mentioned earlier, we're resilient people and we survived and we thrived. And I want kids to read this story and to feel that sense of pride. And I want them to be able to say to their teachers, to whomever, you know, I am Métis, and to be proud of it. And so I'm hoping that this story will just kind of stir that sense of Métis pride in children right across this province.